And Vicki, nice to see you. Keep those boys in order back there. I'm glad you're here. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably be joined by some others that may still be over helping out with breakfast and other things, but thank you, Dennis. We're going to go ahead and begin so we can welcome those who are online watching our Sunday school lesson today, and we're going to be communicating from 1 Kings chapter 15. If you'd like to locate that portion of the scriptures in your Bible, 1 Kings chapter 15. Just a couple of things related to schedule changes. Don't forget that we will not be having evening service tonight because of the 4th weekend. Also, because tomorrow is the 4th of July, we will not be having Grow tomorrow night. So you might make note of that. They still will be having Grow at the regular times on Thursday morning, Saturday morning, if you'd like to be part of that. A week from tomorrow is our youth camp beginning, and so please be much in prayer about that. By the way, the mini camp for the children went really well, and that was on Friday. I understood at least one of the kids got saved at that time, so we're happy about that. So, Angela, welcome. Who's that guy with you? Your husband, and his name again is Ricky. It has too long. We'll never forget Angela, though. Well, God bless you guys. Welcome back. Glad you're here to join us. So, sorry, that was a squirrel, an excursus off the beaten track. All the people watching online are going, what in the world is he doing? Well, welcoming our missionaries from Argentina is what I'm doing. So, please be much in prayer about camp, youth camp coming up, starting a week from tomorrow. And then I know a lot of you will be involved in Vacation Bible School, helping out with that. That's the week of the 25th of July. So a lot of important summer activities here around the church this month. So be in prayer about that, okay? My heart's encouraged. It's good to see you all. And so, again, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 15 for our Bible study today. And we're going to look at the life of an important person who was the king of Judah, the southern kingdom. And his name is Asa. And Asa is one of those individuals who had a very, very long and fruitful ministry, and the Bible summarizes that he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. And so we're going to consider the life of Asa today in this text and look at a couple of the things that he did that were so right, and then a couple of the things that he did that maybe he could have thought through just a little better. But I think it's exemplary of a Christian life and how we too should be cautious to deal with the Lord on all of our major decisions and not forget the Lord at important times in our lives. So we can learn from the life of Asa, and that's what we're going to try to do today in 1 Kings 15, all right? Now, things get a little bit convoluted here when we get into the divided monarchy. We get a whole bunch of different kings involved. And I'm going to call on someone and ask you to please stand and share with us in order the names of the kings of Judah. Okay, not all of them, we just need the first, let's say 5. All right. Do I have a volunteer first? This is when it's convenient to be hard of hearing. Is that right? Okay. Richard? He can't hear either. Okay. I knew that was going to be his answer. And now I'm pretty sure whoever I ask is going to be hard of hearing and will not answer. Exactly. Well, you'll remember our discussion last week when the kingdom divided. Rehoboam becomes the king of Judah in the south. Jeroboam takes the northern 10 tribes and establishes what will become throughout history known as Israel proper, and then Judah in the south. And so, but Rehoboam, when he died, and of course we examined last week his major errors, and he had followed basically in the latter years of Solomon's life. He did what Solomon had done at the end and was worshiping false gods, making high places, building temples to false pagan gods, which was an abomination to God. And so at the end of Rehoboam's life, he died, and he was followed by his son Abijam. And Abijam continued that pattern of decline and sliding into paganism. But Abijam had a son whose name was Asa. And that's who we're going to look at briefly today, is King Asa, who will rule Judah for 41 years. And again, as I mentioned, he did right in the sight of the Lord. This is a really important commentary, and I know some of your testimonies, that some of you grew up in a home that did not honor God. Maybe you grew up in a family dynamic that for generations they did not honor God. But yet your life was supernaturally touched, and you were transformed, and you were made a child of God when you trusted Jesus, and you were added to the forever family of God. And it forever changed your trajectory of your life. Even though you didn't have a good example of godly living, you changed that. And because you gave your life to the Lord and committed yourself to learning and growing in discipleship and becoming more like Jesus, you set a pattern for your own kids that are also following that. And so even though Asa did not have a very good example in his father Abijam, he still changed his life and did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Now, in the northern kingdom, things are going to go from bad to worse. Just a whole bunch of, I can say, court intrigue in the north. Of course, Jeroboam the first was that rival that split the kingdom. I mentioned that in order for him to have control religiously of the people in the north, one of the first things he did was try to discourage them from going down to Jerusalem. He didn't want them to go to the beautiful Temple of Solomon. And so he established his own two religious cult centers. I mentioned them last week. Do you remember where they were? Somebody give me one of them. Where were the two places that he put these pagan idols to worship at? Dan in the north, the furthest northern city basically of Israel, Dan, the tribe of Dan, after originally settling over near the Philistine area, they were not able to do anything with the Philistines, so the vast majority of the tribe of Dan found a location and moved all the way to the northern part of Israel. That's why we hear the phrase, from Dan to Beersheba, from the farthest point in the north to the southernmost part in the south. Okay, but yes, at Tel Dan, he established a cult center there for worship so that they didn't have to go to Jerusalem. Where was the other one at? Bethel. Very good. So at Bethel and at Dan, in the northern part of Israel, the southern part of Israel, before you go into Benjamin, that's where Bethel is. And what did he set up there? Golden calves, reminiscent of the Mount Sinai incident, which they had borrowed from Egypt, because in Egypt, one of the gods of Egypt was the golden calf of Goshen. Interesting. The children of Israel lived in Goshen for 400 years when their nation was being formed. Probably where they got the idea, hey, golden calf, let's make that our God. Anyway, So Jeroboam sins wickedly, leads the people. And by the way, God had promised Jeroboam, a prophet of God said to Jeroboam, God is going to allow this nation to split. You're going to become the king of the north. And he did. And God told him, Jeroboam, if you will obey, if you will live by the laws of Moses, if you will follow me and nobody else, I will keep your dynasty forever in the north. Well, Jeroboam right away jettisons the true worship of the true and living God and goes after these pagan gods, builds all kinds of idol places and high places. And so, right from the beginning, Jeroboam failed. His son also failed. His name was Nadab, followed in the wickedness of his dad. A prophet of God comes on the scene by the name of Jehu, and his father was Hanani. And they both prophesied that the line of Jeroboam would be ended. And sure enough, in fulfillment of Jehu's prophecy, a guy by the name of Zimri, one of the captains or generals of Nadab's army, and after 2 years of Nadab ruling, Zimri kills Nadab, assassination. And because he was a military leader and had part of the backing of the military, he took over. And do you know what? Does anybody know how long Zimri ruled after usurping the kingdom from Jeroboam's dynasty? 7 days. Do we really call that a reign? I mean, it may have reigned for 7 days, but you don't call that a kingdom. But what he did was exactly what the Word of God said through the prophet when Jehu said this. Because in those 7 days, Zimri, with his military, went around and destroyed every living member of Jeroboam's family. Wiped out the entire, even distant relatives were killed, so that nobody would claim they had a right to the throne because they were descendants of Jeroboam. In 7 days, he did that. But Zimri, after 7 days, he was challenged by another one of the generals who had a bigger part of the army, and ultimately, he knew he was going to be overthrown by the other general whose name was Omri. All right? O-M-R-I, Omri, not Henri, although he was. But Omri besieged the city where Zimri was at, and so he committed suicide after 7 days of being the king. But in that amount of time, he had eradicated Jeroboam's family. Omri comes on the scene, and even though Zimri had such a limited claim to the throne, Omri killed all his family. Aren't these loving people? Really good examples of Christians. Okay, they weren't at all. Every one of the kings in the northern kingdom, the Bible summary is, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord because they allowed pagan worship. And so, does anybody know, because Omri, who ruled for 12 years, he ended up buying a hill, purchasing an area, and building a new capital city in the north. The Bible says in just a few verses it talks about Omri that he built this city capital in the north, and it was made of ivory, which indicates the great amount of wealth that was available to him. Does anybody know what the capital city was that he built? It remained the capital for the rest of the time in the northern kingdom. Samaria. Good. So Omri built Samaria, made it his capital, and ultimately it's Samaria, the capital city in the north, that will fall to the Assyrians in 722 BC. All of these things with Nadab and Zimri, that happened around 910 BC. Because there was one name that I skipped. There was Jeroboam, there was Nadab, and then he had a son, Bashan. And Bashan is part of our story today. And he rules for a long time in the north, and it's his son, Elah, that rules for a couple of years, then Zimri, and all those dynamics. Anybody know who the wicked son of Omri was? Again, they all did evil in the sight, but this guy did worse than any of them. Ahab, very good. And Ahab, of course, marries Jezebel, that whole thing. Okay. All of you just got a little bit of a historical overview of this time period. Wake up now. Wake up. Okay. But we approach this king in the south, in Judah, who is going to follow after his father Abijam dies. Notice verse 8, that's a summary of him. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son ruled in his stead. So we want to look in verse 9 and following and look at a little bit this character of Asa, who's going to say in this text that all the years of his life, he and Bashan in the north are going to fight each other. And so that's part of this story. Okay. Now there's a parallel text in 2 Chronicles that we're going to look at from time to time, and I'll just mention it. You won't even have to turn there unless you want to, but in 2 Chronicles 14, 15, 16, that portion of Scripture embellishes what we have here in the book of Kings. But let's just read the first verses, because it says that in the early years of Asa's reign, he had peace. All right? And so, 1 Kings, let me read the first couple verses of 1 Kings 15:9. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah. And 41 years reigned he in Judah. And his mother's name was Maacah, his daughter, the daughter of Abishalom. Okay? So I'll mention about the mother here shortly, but what we know at the beginning of Asa's reign, verse 11, and Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. Interesting how he doesn't say anything about his father Abijam or his grandfather Rehoboam or even Solomon. Asa did right like David did in the sight of the Lord. Okay? And he took away the Sodomites out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. And also Maacah, his mother, even her he removed from being queen, because she had made an idol in a grove, and Asa destroyed her idol and burnt it by the brook Kidron. Okay. What we know, though, at the beginning of his reign, because he's doing these good things, he's eradicating the evil that had been tolerated in the land for a generation, with the end of Solomon's reign, with Abijam, with Rehoboam. All of those had done evil. And so for a long time, years of time, the nation had declined into paganism. And again, Asa breaks that tradition and becomes a wholehearted believer in the true and living God. And for the most part, he eradicates these evil things that are in the land. What's interesting about that, over in 2 Chronicles, it talks about in chapter 14, that he did right in the sight of the Lord. Verse 1 of 2 Chronicles 14 says, So Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. In his days the land was quiet 10 years. So as we compare the texts, it says that Asa enjoyed peace for a 10-year period. Because he did what was right. Because he honored God. God blessed him. And for 10 years, there was absolutely no military conflict. They enjoyed peace. Well, the reason I highlight that is because oftentimes that's true in our life. I mean, the New Testament talks about the peace of God, right? And having peace with God. And it's a truism that when we truly follow the true and living God, peace is one of the benefits of that. In Asa's life, there was a time of peace because God protected him. In fact, again, over in 2 Chronicles, in verse 9 of chapter 14, I was reading there earlier, listen to this story. There came out against them, talking about Asa and the tribe of Judah, Zerah, the Ethiopian. Frank and Karen can tell us about Ethiopia, but we're not going to let you because you're hard of hearing. Okay. And so, watch this though. It says that Zerah, the Ethiopian, with an host of 1,000,000. How many is that? Yes, that's what I was answering, my answer. Anybody know what 1,000,000 is? A lot. Yeah, we keep coming to that conclusion. It's 1,000,000. Wow. That is a huge army. But notice that even though they had a huge, powerful military force, numerically, notice the next part of the phrase. It says, and 300 chariots. So really, for an army of 1,000,000 people, 300 chariots is not all that powerful a force. I mean, that's the way we probably could interpret it. But what happens is very amazing. I mean, anybody with an army of 1,000,000 people, that's a force to be reckoned with, and it's scary. I mean, Asa, there's no way Asa has anything that approaches that numerically in his army. And if they came from Ethiopia, where did they have to go through? Frank?
They'd have to go through around the Red Sea.
Yes, but what nation would they have gone through in Africa to get up to Judah?
I'm trying to look at the map in my head.
How's that going?
It's just nothing but the Red Sea.
But you got to go through Egypt
Yes.
to get to the Red Sea. And so this force was significant enough that they went through Egypt without being stopped and got across the Red Sea, and they come up now to fight against Asa. This is what I want you to see in that story. Remember the first 10 years of peace. Now we're coming to the end of that, but notice Asa's response to this thing. So there's 1,000,000 soldiers, 300 chariots. Then Asa went out against him, and they set the battle in array in the valley of Zaphathath and at Marashah. All right, verse 11. This is what I want to get to. And Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord, our God, for we rest on thee, and in thy name we go against this multitude. O Lord, thou art our God, let no man prevail against thee. And the next verses tell us that when the battle is joined, that the Israelites, the Judeans, the Jewish people, they rout the forces of Zerah, the Ethiopian, and everybody flees away, and it's all of God. So the Lord smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. And Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown. Okay, I don't need to get further into that, except you get the point, right? At the time that Asa is properly worshiping God, giving proper honor to the true and living God, eradicating all of the wickedness that's in the land, and reestablishing worship of Jehovah, God was his source of power, routing this Ethiopian force. And so, as we come back to 1 Kings passage, you need to understand at the beginning, once again, he started out great. And really, he does serve the Lord his whole life, but at the end of his life, he starts making some decisions that are void of God. Okay, that's what we want to emphasize. So the first thing to point out is because he trusted in God totally, for the first 10 years he had peace, no problems. But then the next phase is that he has trials. That's going to happen. It doesn't matter who we are as Christians. If we trust in the Lord and live a long life, at some point we're all bound to have trials. And so when Asa starts having these troubles, he at first turns to God and prays to God and gets help, and God delivers him, like with the Ethiopians. But after a while, he starts making some other decisions without consulting God. And it all has to do with what's going on with Baashan, the king of Israel in the north. And so let's look at that trial as it emerged. Again, he tries to purify the land. By the way, it says in the passage we read already that his mother, Maacah, his mother, really, as we see the genealogy in there, this is his grandmother. So, I mean, even in the same text, he talks about, and his father David. Well, David wasn't his direct father, right? There was David, there was Solomon, there was Rehoboam, there was Abijam, then there's Asa. But the Bible talks like David was his father. And Maacah is his grandmother, not his direct mother, but in the same kind of way referred to as ancestor. All right? She's still alive when he becomes the king. And she has her own high place. She has her own idol that she made and worshiped at. And so that's the verse we read in verse 13, that he removed her from being the queen. She was the queen mother. That would have been the actual title of her role. But she would have been a very prominent person in the court, would have had sway over decisions. And so he removes. Isn't it interesting? I read it out loud that in verse 12, and he took away the Sodomites out of the land, removed all of the idols and that his fathers had made. Okay, so one of the things, and this is just an explanation of that whole Sodomite thing, many of these pagan religions were fertility cults. In other words, they worshiped at these places, asking their gods, small g, to bless their land, make it fruitful, productive, to make them fruitful and productive and having children. And so that's what these fertility cults were all about. And when we talk about Baal, we talk about Ashura or Ashtaroth. Those were both gods of the Canaanites who were fertility deities. And in their worship practices, they would have these male and female prostitutes that were part of their religious ceremonies, their cults, pagan idolatry, terrible immorality, tied to that. That's part of what Asa said. We'll have none of that. A direct violation of God's word in the Mosaic law. And so he did away with all of that, destroyed all of those temples, did away with all of those groves and high places and all of the idols that had been built by Rehoboam and Abijam. And now he's eradicating the land from that. Even to the point of demoting his queen grandmother out of the court because she worshiped at her own idol. And it's interesting, in her case, just to make a national public statement about it, it says that he took down her idol, he destroyed it, crushed it, and then burned it in front of everybody in the Kidron Valley, which is just, the temple would have been here, down the valley is into the Kidron Valley, and the other side is the Mount of Olives, a very short valley. But the Kidron Valley is where he burned this idol of his grandmother. All right, so he's doing what's right in the sight of the Lord. But into this circumstance comes trials and testings. And when he's faced with that, after doing this reform throughout the country, he ends up with what's probably best referred to as a lapse. He just, after all of his early successes, always trusting in God, he just starts doing things in his own power, in his own might. Let me explain that. In verse 16 and 17, something happens. This war begins with Baasha, the king of Israel. Just so we have the transition, verse 15, and he brought in the things which his father had dedicated and the things which himself had dedicated into the house of the Lord, silver and gold and vessels. So again, in rededicating the temple, reinstituting godly worship, he puts all of the valuable things into the temple. Verse 16, and there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might not suffer any to go out or to come in to Asa, king of Judah. All right. Ramah, this place of Ramah was a city. Well, Baasha, the king of the north, comes all the way down to the border between the north and the south. It's the southernmost place that's not in Judah. In fact, it was actually invading into Judah to take over Ramah. Ramah is about 6 miles north of Jerusalem. And Baasha takes over that city and begins to build fortress there, armament. So what's it mean when it says that he might not suffer any to go out or to come in to Asa, king of Judah? Okay, you would be right in thinking in the context of like siege. They couldn't go out or come in. But this was even more insidious because by taking over Ramah and building it up as a fortress, Baasha was thinking, hey, in a future operation, this will be my launching point if I attack Judah. But the other thing that might not be readily noticed is that by taking over Ramah, the major north-south trade routes went just across the southern part of Israel now and not through Judah. And so what had made Solomon and even Rehoboam to a degree wealthy were these rich trade routes that ran right through the heart of the country. Now, when Baasha takes over, builds up the fortress of Ramah, he's not letting any of those caravans come south or go from north to south to join the caravans. So this was a huge economic hit on Jerusalem and King Asa. All right, I don't want to get too into that except to say it's at this point that Asa, somewhat in his own self-sufficiency, gets a little prideful. And even though he's doing right in the sight of the Lord, related to religion, he starts making some pretty selfish decisions. Notice what happens. Verse 18. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord, so the things that had been dedicated to the Lord, he'd put them in the temple. Now he's taken all that wealth out, and the treasures of the king's house, and delivered them into the hands of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Benhadad, the son of Tabriammon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus. All right, so get the picture. He's taken all of the wealth that he has in his possession out of the temple of God and out of his own palace. He sends some servants with this bribe. And he sends them secretively up to King Benhadad in Damascus. Well, Benhadad had actually entered into a treaty with Baasha, the king of Israel. And so this is what the payment, this is what the bribe was all about. Notice the next verse. There is a league between me and thee. In other words, Asa is saying, listen, I'm going to give you these gifts, but I wanted to make a league with us so that we're allies together. And this is what he says. And between my father and thy father, behold, I have sent unto thee a present of silver and gold. Come and break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. All right, just reading those things that I just read, what's he saying? What's he hoping to accomplish by paying this bribe to Benhadad? Okay, yes. It's a military alliance between him and the king of Syria north of Israel. And he says, I want you to receive my presents. I want us to enter into a league together, an alliance. And I want you to attack Baasha. Even though you had a treaty with him, attack him in the north. And what's he hoping will be the result? Well, he knows that if he's being attacked in the north by Syria, Baasha is going to have to withdraw his troops and go up there to defend himself. All right? And that's exactly what happens. So Asa's reasoning was, if I pay Benhadad enough money, bribe him, he'll attack, then Baasha will have to address his northern kingdom issues further north and leave my area alone. That's what he said. That's what he said to Benhadad. Attack him so that he will withdraw from me. Okay? And so Benhadad hearkened unto King Asa, verse 20, and sent the captains of his hosts, which he had against the cities of Israel, and smote Ijon, and Dan, and Abel Beth Maacah, and all Kinneroth, and all the land of Naphtali. All right. When it says there, so he's attacking the very northern cities. Ijon, Dan in the north. This Abel Beth Maacah is also in the north, not far from Dan. And Chinneroth. Anybody know where that is? That's the ancient name of a city that was on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. Have you read in the New Testament where it talks about the water, the lake of Kinneroth or Gennesareth? That's the Sea of Galilee. And this Chinneroth, it's interesting, it talks about it's really describing a musical instrument. It's like a lyre, a stringed instrument, and it's in the form of the Lake of Galilee, Sea of Galilee. It's broader at one point and narrows down, and they called that a Chinneroth. That was the name of this musical instrument that looked like the Sea of Galilee. So that's how the name Kinneroth or Gennesaret all came into being. It's in reference to this thing. But anyway, so as Ben-Hadad's attacking the north, now Baasha has to withdraw to defend himself. And it came to pass when Baasha heard thereof that he left off building of Ramah and dwelt in Tisra, which is in the north. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all Judah. None was exempted. And they took away the stones of Ramah and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasha had builded. And King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Okay, that's just a lot of names, but you understand exactly what's happening here, right? Baasha withdraws after investing a lot of money building up this city of Ramah. When he withdraws, Asa immediately mobilizes everybody in his country, in Judah. They all go up there and they all start carrying rocks away from the fortress at Ramah. And they actually built 2 fortified cities with the stuff they pirated from Baasha's efforts at Ramah. So, in other words, Asa, through this stratagem, ended up successfully accomplishing what he hoped to. He got Ben-Hadad to attack Baasha in the north. Baasha withdraws. He gets all of the city, destroys the armaments of Ramah, so it would no longer be a fortress, and builds his own fortresses to defend his border. He reinstitutes, after building these fortresses north of that trade route, he gets all of that benefit back. And so in Asa's mind, he's pretty smart. He's thinking he has accomplished something great. But what is true of all of these efforts by Asa in incorporating Ben-Hadad and attacking Baasha? What's true? What do you see in his strategy to do that? Thank you, Jess. That's what I was looking for. He did not seek God in any of this. He had been prospered by God. He had peace for a long time. Then he kind of comes to the conclusion, you know what? I can do this on my own. I can make my own decisions. And in this case, it worked out, which even fortified his own ideas of his greatness. And so even though in the eyes of the scripture writers, Asa did that which was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of his life, and it says that, at some point he became proud enough to think he could make all these decisions on his own, and he stopped consulting God. That's the lesson of this. So often it's true that when we're first believers, when we first trust Christ, we're so excited, we're so quick to go to God in prayer and seek His help and advice. Sometimes the older we get, the more stable we get in our life, more comfortable we get. And sometimes I think we start thinking, I don't need to consult the Lord on this. I can do it myself. That's the real sin of Asa here, is becoming self-sufficient and independent and not thinking he needs God anymore. Now, he doesn't forsake God completely, but what he does is he gets comfortable. And he thinks, I can figure out a strategy to do my own thing and it'll work. and he basically left God out of it. Folks, that's what we do not want to do in our life. Ultimately, he says it serves for 41 years. In the last 2 years, basically, when he was 39, it says that in both Kings and in Chronicles, it says that he developed a very serious foot disease. And I don't know what it was, but it was so debilitating, it basically, he couldn't do anything except sit in the palace and try to rule from there. Whether it was something related to a diabetes or gout or some other foot disease, he was out of it until he died after ruling for 41 years. I think the word of application for us here is this: let's don't, as we age in the Lord, as we get more and more accustomed to God blessing us, let's not get to the point where we forsake God by not seeking Him for major decisions we must make. If we do, the problems are very likely to get bigger and be more serious for us. Okay? All right, our time's up. Let's get to church. Thank you for being here today. Ricky and Angela, God bless you guys. Great to see the Freemans. And it's good to see you all. Thanks for coming. Getting around okay?
A little bit of time, brother.
I guess I better turn this off.